Okay, you've met Gilly, you've met Chris, you've met Anne already. The purpose behind what we're going to do just now is not just to hear their point of view, but also to hear your point of view. And to that end, we have some stewards going around with microphones. If I can get those stewards to leap to their feet, wave the microphones in front of you so that you actually get the opportunity to share what you regard as important. The first question, which we're going to bring up on screen so that you can actually see that, is a very simple one. Do you think developing countries regard education provision as a priority? Do you think that developing countries regard education provision as a priority? And I'm going to start by asking Chris that question. What do you reckon?
I don't know, is the answer, is the honest answer. But I'm not too worried about that, because I think that ultimately it's up to developing countries to take the same political choices that we take. Robin gave us a wee pep talk before we came on and said to be contentious and controversial. But I think that one of the challenges which we talked about, some of us talked about in the session on tax, is that there's not enough money within these developing countries to finance everything that they need to finance. And within limited resources, decisions have to be taken about and their political choices. And I think where possible, political choices should be taken at the closest level to where they're applied. And so I think ultimately, when you have limited resources, it should be up to developing countries to make those difficult choices between what they prioritize.
Okay, Anne?
Thank you. Thinking back to 2000 again, the statement from world leaders then, no country seriously committed to education for all will be thwarted in its achievement of universal primary school completion by 2015 due to lack of resources. One figure again on that, low-income governments spend an average from the Global Campaign for Education figures here of 9% of their budgets on basic education, primary and lower secondary. So, they put a value in that. Compare that with the donor countries who made this brilliant proclamation. They only allocate 4% to that. So that it doesn't match up. The Campaign for Education would like to see both low-income and middle-income governments increase that to 10%, another 1%, but also to see that our own governments and the other governments who made this commitment to put theirs up another 6% to 10%. And just a final comment about teachers in Malawi. The teacher unions there are also saying that a lot of them don't have work because their government is told by donors that they can't spend so much on on education and on health. They don't have jobs. So I think there is a role for donors to listen to those governments and their priorities.
Okay, I'm going to ask Gilly. Now, you've already heard that Gilly comes from Tanzania. There's first-hand experience of a developing country. Gilly, is it a priority?
Yeah, for a number of years, education has not been a priority in developing countries like Tanzania. But right now, due to globalization and privatization and investment, it has been a priority because a lot of jobs are taken out with people coming outside the country, like China. And even, for example, in Tanzania right now, a lot of jobs, teaching jobs, are taken by teachers from outside the countries, like Kenya. So it's time for the government in our country, they've realized like its potential, it's a priority for us to have education because of all these things of globalization and privatization thing that is coming in our country, so that we can have, for example, Tanzania is having a lot of natural resources and tourism abundant, but all of these works are taken by international people and people outside. So education right now is going to be a priority.
What do you think? From what you've heard, from your own opinion, do you think the developing countries of our world regard education as a priority? If you've got a comment that you'd like to share about this, literally just put your hand in the air, we'll get a microphone to you. Don't be concerned about the fact there's other people around here.
even in recent politics in the Arab Spring, there's numerous civil wars going on at the moment. They can't count education as a priority while there's bloodshed and war. So how do we choose which developing countries do regard it? I don't think it's fair to clump them in one as a unity.
Okay. Thoughts? We give them time to think, you see.
You're absolutely right. You know, that everything is connected, and all the Millennium Development Goals are connected as well. And one, you know, will influence the other. Just as you're speaking, there's a statistic that sticks out in my mind, and it's 550, 500. $5 billion dollars over the last 10 years was given by aid agencies, Christian Aid, Action Aid, Save the Children, Oxfam. 50 billion is a figure over the last 10 years of government aid and European aid, for example. But $500 billion dollars has been taken back again from the developing world in unfair trade agreements, tax havens. We heard that session from Chris. So, yeah, it's not simple, and we really have to look at the causes of poverty and injustice as well. You're right.
Okay, I think Anne has raised one or two points which are really useful as we move on to our next question. Mindful of what came from the floor on that answer, what would you see as the main reason for education not being available to every young person? Now, we've heard one or two ideas. Perhaps there's more within our audience today, but if there is one thing that you could say as the main reason for education not being available, what would it be? Gilly?
I think I'm tempted, because I just did a session on tax, and it's a priority of Christian Aid to talk about tax. I'm tempted to talk about the tax revenues and the lack of tax revenues that can provide resources for funding all of these things, all of the very important things that we in Scotland or the UK can take for granted that comes from our public sector. But I think to go one step sort of more fundamental than talking about tax is just to talk about, you know, for me, the one thing that would need to be tackled is an imbalance of power. And in just about anything that you analyse, you know, the stuff that Anne's has talked about, you know, trade rules, the power of multinationals, the power within the United Nations, power to decide on things like climate change, just about everything I've come across in working in the area of development, so much comes down to an imbalance of power, a concentration of power, economic and political power, in relatively small countries, often, you know, America, Britain, Europe, these kinds of places, which manifests itself, which has huge consequences in terms of, for example, how deals are done, how trade rules are agreed, and how tax agreements you know, how this tax system works. These things are all really designed by people in places like London and New York and places like that, and they're not designed with the interests of people that I'm concerned about. You know, that's not how it's done. So that's the one thing I would tackle.
Okay, I want to put this one out to all of you. Is Chris or are you in total agreement with Chris about this, or do you have opinions? There's at least two hands in this area here.
Yeah, I just think it's unaffordable to the majority of people because of all that's happening that he had explained with tax havens and everything else. It's making it quite expensive to everyone.
So you would see the actions of the West as determining the availability of education?
Quite so.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts?
You mentioned there the multinational companies, and yes, the underdeveloped countries could start charging this tax, but what's to say these companies won't just take their business elsewhere?
Yeah. Any response to that one? Yeah. Hands in the air if you want to comment, please. There's one down here.
It's a very good question, and it's one that that's the response that a lot of multinationals threaten, is to say, well, look, if you start imposing higher taxes on such and such, we'll just go somewhere else. The reality is that that's more often a threat than a reality. Often, many countries have natural resources that, they only exist in those countries, so that they can't really go anywhere else. And like I say, my observation is that often that's more of a threat than a reality. But nevertheless, it's important. And one of the strands that we're working on at the moment, one of the strands in Christian Aid's tax strategy, is to work with countries to develop almost what might be called collective bargaining, so that you don't play off one country that might have copper, for example. You don't play off one copper-producing country against another one to compete to have lowest taxes, but you try and sort of, almost like a trade union, have collective bargaining power, so that when you're negotiating with multinationals, you come from a position of greater strength. And that's something that we're working on too.
Thank you. Comment down at the front here. Yep.
It strikes me that an awful lot of the discussion up until now has been about multinationals and governments and countries and policies. And what we're all here today about is individual action. We all voted with our feet and came here today to find out things. And the biggest barrier, I think, to education and progress in the Millennium Goals is the individual choice for others, rather than it's an option that we take to either be selfish and do nothing, or to take individual action on any given subject, including education.
Okay. It's always good to get a senior school pupil sharing their views. Does anyone want to come back on that?
I think as well, to look at it, it's all fine and well as saying, yeah, okay, we'll give you this money, it's going into these countries, but surely there is an imbalance of power again within the countries. The money's not filtering through to the people who need it the most. Surely that's something that we can be looking at, that the governments are distributed it evenly throughout the country to the people who need it most, instead of making the rich richer and the poor poorer in some of these countries.
Okay. Any others? I'm going to take or pose one last question before we break for lunch. Don't take that as a cue not to engage in it. But if we know the costs, and it was 35 billion of providing education, how can we fund every child getting that chance? Or is that just a pipe dream? Anne?
Well, first of all, we're still very short of what was promised. To the tune of 10.5 billion a year is still needed. Around a third is only what has been provided so far. So that's a start. But we have heard that the aid isn't enough as well. I'm really interested in, maybe Gilly will know more about it, the global partnership work that's been going on for education in many different countries, and it's picking up on your point that where it seems to have worked particularly well is when there are proper plans in place that are put together by the government of that country, the education people involved in it, but also with civil society groups, non-governmental organisations, so that it's not an education that's not relevant and imposed from above, but is coming from below as well.
Gilly. I think there are points that we could actually explore just now. The point that was made at the front here about individual choice is one that we're going to pick up on after lunch. And if I can give you one task in amongst eating your packed lunch and catching up with other people, one task, we're going to come back to what we can do individually and collectively to change the current situation. And we're going to continue this discussion after our lunch break. So thank you very much to those people who participated. Thank you very much for listening. But the task is, I want you to consider how you can respond. There are no right answers, there's no wrong answers in a discussion and a debate, but it's from your contributions that perhaps we can evolve something which is capable of changing how things are. Thank you very much for your time.